VikesNow. I am Dustin Baker. This is the final show before Week 10. Vikings-Saints with or without Michael Thomas. That's the late, somewhat breaking thing. Is Michael Thomas allegedly was put in a cop car, and who the hell knows what happened. But we're gonna get through. I don't know if you guys saw that yet, but you're
Michael Thomas.
Yeah, he allegedly got arrested.
Right? There's a lot of Mike Thomases out there.
Yeah, Michael Thomas for the Saints allegedly had some sort of altercation. I don't know if he's gonna get in trouble for it or if it was
like just now.
Like 10 minutes before we got on here to press.
Wow.
But this is VikesNow. We'll chat about that a little bit. We're going to talk about some unsung Vikings because we are at the season's midpoint, or we were at halftime of the Falcons game. Get into some Josh Dobbs items and then some predictions. I've got Dakota, who's been on the show now about over half a dozen times. Tyler's getting there. He's become my Friday guest. How are both of you?
Better than Mike Thomas, I guess.
Yeah, it was the Saints, Mike Thomas, some sort of altercation. Google it or get on Twitter. Tyler, how are you?
Wolves back. Yeah. Wolves back. We beat the Spurs. We didn't choke. We didn't pull a Timberwolves. So I am doing well.
Awesome. All right, let's get into some of this Viking stuff, even though the Timberwolves are probably even more impressive right now than these Vikings. Like I said, we're at the season's midpoint. It's kind of weird that the Vikings have a 5-4 record. And if you would have asked a lot of the fan base back in May when the schedule came out, we'd be like, that sounds about right. We really took this strange path to get there or get here. Without Justin Jefferson, the team gets better. So in order for that to happen, a winning record, 7th seed in the playoffs, a game and a half out of first place in NFC North, there had to be some unsung Vikings players or heroes, so to speak, to effectuate that path. So Dakota, I want to know, 9 games in the books, who is the most unsung Viking performer to date?
Well, I kind of have two. My first one would be just the offensive line as a whole. You know, they saw the criticism from the quarterback series and they really stepped it up, being one of the highest graded offensive lines in the league. And shout out to Ed Ingram specifically for just his overall cleanup, especially if you saw how he played last season, you know that's a huge thing. But for me, the biggest unsung hero of the Minnesota Vikings has to be Cam Bynum. I love him. I absolutely love him. I think, maybe he's a little bit more of a popular choice, but definitely at the beginning of the season, there was some hesitation and some kind of backlashing from the fan base. But I think the last couple of games have really sealed in the fact that he is truly a hero for the defense. He's allowed, he's ranked number 1 on solo tackles, 2nd in receptions allowed, and is tied for 5th in interceptions based on PFF records. And, with his media coverage lately, he has been bringing a lot of awareness to his home country of the Philippines and his wife and getting her over here. And I think it's really, really great that, a lot of other defensive people, high-end people, even in the NFL, would see this coverage, see this spotlight on them, and kind of turn into a diva. Stephon Diggs. And I think that he's genuinely just a great guy, both on the field and off, and it's really showing in how he's playing.
I am a nincompoop, and when I did a lot of 53-man roster projections, I thought it was easy for me to cut Cameron Bynum because Lewis Seen was going to play and they weren't going to keep 6 safeties. And so one of the biggest things I got wrong this offseason was that perhaps Bynum wouldn't even make the roster. And God, what an idiot I am in hindsight. My unsung Viking, I'll keep it quick, is Mekhi Blackman. Not because it's supernatural that a rookie cornerback would play well. It's that the Vikings desperately needed a cornerback to play well with the group they had going into the season. We thought Byron Murphy would be the lockdown version of a corner because he was like the one major signing in that room, and he's only been mediocre. So in order to offset that, you needed somebody between Andrew Booth and Mekhi Blackman to do the thing, and he's played 126 defensive snaps so far this year, got a 70-something PFF grade, not bad for a third-round rookie. So my current unsung hero in limited action is Mekhi Blackman. Tyler, who you got?
I've got Ivan Pace Jr. and Jordan Hicks. They've both exceeded expectations. I feel like we all know the story of Ivan Pace, coming in as an undrafted free agent and making the roster and sort of establishing himself as one of the best young linebackers in the league. But Jordan Hicks went from this sort of aging veteran that needed to be replaced in Donatell's defense to being one of the better linebackers in football. So it's been a huge rebound year for Jordan Hicks, and it's been a great year for Ivan Pace, the rookie. And really, Brian Flores deserves a ton of credit for that, having that background as a linebackers coach from his time in New England, as well as coaching the safeties. Just seeing that our linebackers are playing well is great to see.
I would say from a 10,000-foot view, Ivan Pace would be the certifiable answer here, the unsung Viking. But because we were all in the weeds when he came via an undrafted free agency, we thought he was snubbed, and then he showed up at training camp and looked good, and then looked even better in the preseason. To us, it's more fruition that, of course he's good. But for the rest of the world, it really probably should be Ivan Pace, considering every GM sport passed on him during the draft, which is still mind-boggling. So I love that one, Tyler. Josh Dobbs is making his first career start as a Viking. If you ever want to know the efficacy of QB wins, Jaren Hall is 1-0 as a Viking, and Josh Dobbs is 0-0. Figure that one out, folks. But I got one for you, Dakota. I really want to know, do you see a path for Josh Dobbs to become an established NFL starter? After watching him a little bit in in Arizona, and then the draft lead up in 2017, and then what he did against the Falcons? Or are we really just going to ride a hot wave of a high-end QB2 like Gardner Minshew a few years ago?
I think there's always this fear, especially with the Vikings, coming after, especially like watching last season, going from the Bills to the Cowboys, seeing how emotional highs and emotional lows. I know that there is definitely that fear going into this game. I would argue that the Green Bay game was an incredibly emotional game, that, this last game could have definitely had that low. I still think we're riding that high, but regardless, I still am very much on the fence in regards to where I sit with Josh Dobbs, as I have lovingly mistakenly called him. I think for right now, he is definitely what we need. He fills a hole in the run game that we've had for like the first half of the season, now especially with Cam Akers out. I think it really is hard to kind of decide what category he sits in after just one game. I really do think these next two games are really going to decide my personal feelings on him. That being said, if we take into consideration also with my love and admiration for Kirk Cousins, I definitely think he is a high-end backup, and I wouldn't be surprised if we bring him back next season.
Yeah, it probably was a more fairer question to ask in January, when we'd seen another 7 or 8 games, or a full season pretty much, from Dobbs between the Cardinals and the Vikings. But I will ask it to you, Tyler, nevertheless. Is there a chance that this man is actually a starter that has just been previously unearthed?
So Josh Dobbs, to me, is a high-end backup quarterback in this league.
Okay.
Now, obviously, Jaren Hall has a chance to sort of take that job away if Dobbs doesn't perform. I don't think his style of play is very sustainable. If he's not going to be confident in throwing the football, it doesn't matter if you're Lamar or Johnny Manziel level of scrambling quarterback. At the end of the day, you got to be able to throw the ball in the league. That being said, I do think that Dobbs is a solid bridge quarterback, and 2024, he's going to be a free agent. So that should be very interesting for him. I'm sure Minnesota is going to want him back, and other teams will definitely be interested in Dobbs, because there's always a place in the NFL for just a really intelligent backup quarterback who has a bit of moxie. You need that Ryan Fitzpatrick or that Josh McCown kind of player, in any locker room. So I'm sure they'd be glad to have a player like Dobbs, on any team.
The Dobbs, as soon as the season's over, hopefully that's deep in the heart of January or February, for all we know. As soon as our Viking season is over, every single talker is going to turn towards Kirk Cousins and the quarterback position, because they notoriously or infamously didn't re-sign him this year yet. And now it's just kind of wait and see. And if they brought Dobbs back and Cousins back, I don't know if they could do that money-wise. They'd already have Jaren Hall, and we wouldn't even be looking at any rookie quarterbacks. We wouldn't have room for them. So it'll be interesting to see if they would bring both back, or if Dobbs truly was just a flash in the pan and had one cool game against the Falcons. But I'm gonna with that Cousins segue. He is out for the rest of the season. It sounds like, based on Kwesi Adolphus-Mensah's words this week, that Cousins himself thinks he can be back by OTAs, which would be May, and he'd basically have a full off season. But the question is, what team is that going to be for? I know he wants to remain with the Vikings. Dakota, and your ardor for Kirk, do you think that this is like, has it become more complicated since the injury to determine whether or not he will rejoin the Vikings for a 7th season? Or based on how he performed and what we know about Dobbs and Hall and what they want for the team in the future, is it more straightforward that he's coming back?
I personally think it's clearer than ever. I hate that it took him being injured for him to finally get the accolades he deserves, the recognition he deserves. He was playing at an MVP level. That is not up for debate. That is true. That is facts. I think the comments that we've gotten from both Kwesi and KOC about how they feel about him are insanely telling. Kwesi even going as far as to say they want him back. It's all just about negotiation at this point. I think he's going to be back. I don't think it's going to be for another 2, 3, 5 seasons. I think maybe it's going to be a 1-year, 2-year at most extension. Maybe just so that way he can develop Hall a little bit more, maybe so that way there's a better transition into whoever is going to take the reins from him. I think it's very evident this team rallies behind Kirk Cousins, and I think for him to end on such a note is not good for the team morale overall, which is very evident in KOC's locker room. I think personally, just based on how Nick Mullins really hasn't been in the conversation. Yes, it's been a couple of, well, he comes off of IR, but we really haven't heard a lot of talk on him. I wouldn't be surprised if he actually is the one that gets cut from the Vikings pretty soon here. I think that Kirk Cousins sticks around. I think Josh Dobbs sticks around, and I think Jaren Hall stick around.
Just roll with Dobbs. You don't even have to.
It always comes out. Yeah, I don't.
It's Freudian to an extent. I would just let it roll as long as he doesn't go on a losing skid. So during the preseason and leading up to the season, I was asked on a couple of different shows, like, what does Kirk Cousins have to do for him to get a contract extension this year? And my response is, no matter what he does, the team has to probably win a playoff game or two, because otherwise they're just doing the same thing every year. All right, Kirk is he's back. They're going to do something different this year, because at that time of the conversation, it will have been 6 years in the books with 1 playoff win. There's something about the formula that wouldn't have worked. Now that's completely tossed on its head, because you won't get to see if Kirk could have effectuated his 2nd playoff win as a member of the Vikings. So I ultimately right now, I would say because he'll be a little cheaper. I mean, and really sucks for his pocketbook that this would do that. I think that some sort of prove it deal, assuming Josh Dobbs does not turn into Diet Lamar for the rest of the way, I think it would be Cousins back. They finally draft a high round with his 1st or 2nd, like Josh Fry talked in the show about Jaden Daniels, somebody like that. And then they do the Packers thing where the guy sits behind Cousins for a year or two and then's ready to go in 2025 or 2026. Tyler, is Kirk back in 2024 more complicated now after seeing Dobbs and do all the mythological stuff? Or is it, what's the path for Kirk to be back or not?
I think there's a very real possibility that Kirk Cousins just isn't on the team next year at all. Obviously, we know how Kevin O'Connell feels about Kirk, and we know that Kirk wants to retire a Viking. But at the end of the day here, this is going to be a Kwesi decision. How does Kwesi feel about paying Kirk Cousins $39 million a year market value for basically a 36-year-old quarterback coming off of a major Achilles tear? I question whether or not it's worth it there, because the Vikings don't have an elite roster that's like contending for a Super Bowl like a Niners or an Eagles. So why are you going to pay Kirk market value? It's the Vikings aren't necessarily in win now mode. They obviously want to be competitive, but they're also trying to kind of rebuild on the fly at the same time. And, you have Jaren Hall, you have Nick Mullins under contract. If Dobbs is serviceable enough to where he can be a bridge guy, am I paying Kirk $39 million to be a luxury bridge quarterback, or will I just pay Dobbs a whole lot less money to do the same thing? If I'm going to draft a quarterback in the 1st round, then Kirk's really only here for 1 year anyway. And does Kirk want to stay here for just 1 more year, or does he want that last big deal on the tail end of his career? I mean, we'll see, but I personally don't see it happening to where Kirk is going to make $40 million a year for like 2 to 3 years like he wants.
So you think that the words that have come out of Kwesi Adoffa-Mensah and Kim McConnell's mouth in the last week and a half have just been fluff?
I wouldn't say it's fluff. They do love Kirk, but it is a business, and a business decision has to be made there. It just, with the extensions coming up, you're probably gonna extend Daniil, definitely gonna extend Darisaw, Jefferson. I don't want a significant percentage of the cap going to a 36-year-old Kirk Cousins coming off a major injury there.
The Saints this week, they're favored by 2.5. Justin Jefferson is one big fat questionable, and it's weird that he's questionable, not doubtful, because it sounded like all week that he wasn't going to play, whether you're listening to Adam Schefter or even the Vikings themselves. They said it would be aggressive to expect Jefferson to play this week. So I was firmly expecting a big, juicy doubtful on the injury report, but it's questionable. So all that is a long story to say that he probably won't play. And since we know that, we think Hawkinson will play. Darisaw is now off the injury report, which is cool. Dakota, predict Vikings-Saints in score for us, if you would.
First and foremost, my absolute favorite rivalry out of every single NFL team. I love this rivalry. Also, once again, shout out to ESPN for getting rid of my favorite feature. I think Justin Jefferson's injury and how they're treating it is very similar to how the Bills treated the Josh Allen injury against us last year. I think it is very much.
God, I haven't thought about that in a year.
Yeah. I think about it all the time. That being said, I think it'll be a defensive game to the end. I know how exciting those are, but I think that these are two really good defenses that are going to go head to head. You've got an inexperienced, in at least this system, quarterback versus Derek Carr, who, well, it's Derek Carr. Mm-hmm. I think that when he gets stressed enough, he makes a lot more mistakes than he does good plays. Ultimately, I think it's a low-scoring game at 17-10 Vikings.
Ooh, okay. So they win by 1 score. That's on brand, and it is a low-scoring game. All right, we'll take it. We'll take any win we can get, especially at home, that can start to reestablish some home field dominance, which vanished for the first 3 weeks of the season, or excuse me, first 3 games of the season. Tyler, your prediction, Vikings-Saints Week 10.
Yeah, I always feel rather uneasy anytime the Vikings are coming off an emotional win and the media is hyping them up like crazy. I just get that bad feeling. Like, honestly, I think the Pastronaut here is going to come crashing down to earth against a really good Saints defense. And this is a Vikings team that's probably going to be without Jefferson. Osborne's questionable. TJ Hawkinson is banged up. Akers is out for the year. They're going to be relying a ton on Madison and Ty Chandler. I just don't know how that's going to go. And the Vikings are 1-3 at home, and this is a home game. And oddly enough, I feel like the Vikings are going to lose this one 27-17. Wow. Also, I had gumbo this week and ate some Cajun food. It just feels like a New Orleans week.
Yeah.
So I know the comments are going to hate me, and please do. But
well, yeah, I know you fired up a back-to-back segment of Kirk ain't coming back and the Vikings are losing.
Idiots. They hate me this week. I already know.
Well, I know a couple of people who are definitely going to be excited about some of the comments.
Yeah. It's not everybody wants Kirk back, and I think it's fluid, but I'm with you, Dakota, that without Kwesi and Kevin saying those things this week, I probably would have been like, mum's the word. They could have been a lot more diplomatic, but they both were like, oh, we don't have to say that we love Kirk Cousins, and negotiations are a two-way street. So they almost made it sound like the ball's in his court.
But they can say, oh my gosh, I love Kirk Cousins. I love Kirk Cousins. He's such a great guy. He's got that dad swag. But at the same time, be cognizant of the fact that it's a business, and are we going to pay him $40 million next year?
Yeah. I have always thought, assuming the Vikings didn't go on a Kirk-led run this year, that the books have been scripted to pay a quarterback less when Jefferson started getting the fat stacks of cash. And that should kick in the 2025 season. So maybe there's 1 year of wiggle room with Kirk back. But I think it has to be that way. And that's why the Chiefs couldn't keep Tyreek Hill, is because it's really tricky to play a QB1 and a WR1, those big market defining salaries. I have the Vikings 23-17. It's really strange that we, when Tyler and I started doing this episode of the show about a month ago, if we would have heard like, no Jefferson, Osborne's questionable, Cousins is not playing, Akers out for the season, we'd be like, oh God, we're going to just get smoked. But now it just doesn't seem like when there's injuries, it's like, oh, that's all right. We're still going to win. It's such a weird turnaround, except for Tyler's prediction, of course. It's such a weird, such a weird turnaround in the last month of, God, how are we going to do anything without Marcus Davenport? And now people don't even remember him. So it's how far we've come.
Here's the logic I try to operate on real quick. If the pendulum is swinging to where everyone is pessimistic about the Vikings, that's when they're going to win, and vice versa. So right now, if everyone's on the Vikings bandwagon, that's exactly when they're going to disappoint you.
In 2017, everybody was usually hopeful by the time they were like 9-2 that good things were going to happen. And then they kept winning. So I'm hoping that this is just 2017 redo with a slightly happier ending, which would be, a complete fairy tale. But I'm telling you, in 2017, you guys know it. Maybe you didn't tweet very much back then, but I swear to God, we all just waited for the bottom to fall out, and then it never really did until almost the last minute. So, all right, guys, Friday we'll be back. You guys let me know if it's better in the afternoon or at nighttime like this, and then we shall talk about either the 6-4 Vikings or the 500 Vikings headed to Denver for a primetime showdown. All right?
Sounds good.
All right, we'll talk to you in 1 week. Take it easy.
Bye.
Later.
Bye.